Well, hello, welcome to another video sermon for Brannockstown Baptist Church. We're going to get back into Exodus just now in our series, Stepping Out with a Saving God. You're going to find it helpful to have a Bible to hand. We're covering a huge chunk of this book today, more than we're actually going to read. Chapters 25 to 31, 7 chapters of the book. Definitely not going to read them first because I think that would be longer than the sermon. But I'll try and bring you up to speed after we've read a little bit to begin with. So let's read a little bit from the start of chapter 25 and a little bit from the end of chapter 31, where we get a bit of a summary of what's going on. And then I'll bring you up to speed, hopefully, as we go along. So Exodus chapter 25, reading from verse 1. The Lord said to Moses, "Tell the Israelites to bring me an offering. You are to receive the offering for me from each man whose heart prompts him to give. These are the offerings you are to receive from them: gold, silver, and bronze, blue, purple, and scarlet yarn and fine linen, goat hair, ram skins dyed red, and hides of sea cows, acacia wood, olive oil for the light, spices for the anointing oil and for the fragrant incense, and onyx stones and other gems to be mounted on the ephod and the breastpiece. Then have them make a sanctuary for me, and I will dwell among them. Make this tabernacle and all its furnishings exactly like the pattern I will show you." And then we have chapters and chapters of instructions from God over what to make. And if you turn over to chapter 31, we'll read what is kind of a summary. So then the Lord said to Moses, "See, I have chosen Bezalel, son of Uri, the son of Hur, of the tribe of Judah, and I have filled him with the Spirit of God, with skill, ability, and knowledge in all kinds of crafts, to make artistic designs for work in gold, silver, and bronze, to cut and set stones, to work in wood, and to engage in all kinds of craftsmanship. Moreover, I have appointed Oholiab, son of Ahisamach, of the tribe of Dan, to help him. Also I have given skill to all the craftsmen to make everything I have commanded you: the tent of meeting, the ark of the testimony with the atonement cover on it, and all the other furnishings of the tent, the table and its articles, the pure gold lampstand and all its accessories, the altar of incense, the altar of burnt offering and all its utensils, the basin with its stand, and also the woven garments, both the sacred garments for Aaron the priest, and the garments for his sons when they serve as priests, and the anointing oil and fragrant incense for the holy place. They are to make them just as I commanded you." And then just look down at the very last verse of chapter 31. When the Lord finished speaking to Moses on Mount Sinai, he gave him the 2 tablets of the testimony, the tablets of stone inscribed by the finger of God. Well, this is God's Word, some of what we're taking in today. And our title for today is Dwelling with God. Dwelling with God. Home. Home, sweet home. Home is where the heart is. You don't need to be a little girl with a small dog and a pair of ruby slippers to agree there's no place like home. Or, since it's 2020 and the strangest year of our lives, let's admit, I need to get away from home. This is the 12th Sunday in a row that we have met from our own homes, and maybe the 10th or 11th if you're joining us from the UK. But let's not be ungrateful. Things could be a lot worse or a lot harder for us, no doubt. And we're thinking today about home, not just the 4 walls, but about who makes home home. Parents see their kids grow up and leave home, and that changes what home feels like. Home suddenly feels empty, I would imagine. With a few silver linings, I would guess. I can imagine home suddenly looks tidier and smells fresher. But mostly the empty thing, yes. Or when 2 people get married, they may be setting up home together, combining their possessions, moving into a place, deciding where all the furniture goes, and discussing such issues as whether any living person needs so many bottles and tubs in one bathroom, or whether an adult really needs to have a Lego display area. All the fun of setting up home. And that's what this week's episode of Exodus is all about. It's all about setting up home, dwelling with God. Last week, God confirmed his covenant with Israel, like a kind of a wedding between God and his people. And now we see them settling down and setting up home together. Moses has been called up onto Mount Sinai into the blazing cloud of God's presence to receive further instruction. And today's passage is a huge monologue from God to Moses, telling him how the people are to make a special home for him so that he can dwell among them. These chapters are building instructions. They are verbal blueprints, mostly in the format, make this, using this, this, and that, and do it in this way. Now, incidentally, in chapters 35 to 40, we'll find very similar details, mostly in the format, the people made this, using this, this, and that, and they made it according to the instructions God had given Moses. Overall, the column inches in the book of Exodus that are given to this tent home for God are about the same as those given to the rescue of the people from Egypt in the first place. Why is that? What's so important about all this? Well, let's find out. Let's start by getting the big idea of what's in these 7 chapters, what happens, what's in there, what are they to make. And let's summarize it with our first heading, which is God designs a home among his people. God designs a home among his people. Take a look at chapter 25, verses 1 to 9. We started with that. It all starts with an offering. Each man whose heart prompts him voluntarily is to give, and all these rich and luxurious materials, precious metals, spices, fabrics, gemstones, and more. Where did all this stuff even come from? They're in the desert. Well, it came from Egypt. When God allowed them to plunder the Egyptians as they left. The Egyptians were so desperate to see the back of God's people that they just loaded them with whatever they wanted so that they would go, after all that God did there. And so even the means to make these offerings has been provided by God. But what's the provision for? Well, verse 8, it's for them to dwell, for God to dwell with his people. Then have them make a sanctuary for me, and I will dwell among them. Make this tabernacle and all its furnishings exactly like the pattern I will show you. The tabernacle, in case you didn't know, is a tent. It's a big tent. It will be God's tent among his tent-dwelling nation. They're going to spend a long time on the move, and God's going to move with them. God designs a home among his people, and then he moves in chapter 40, not to kind of give the climax of things away, but it says, then the cloud from Sinai covered the tent of meeting, and the glory of the Lord from the top of Sinai filled the tabernacle. Moses could not enter the tent of meeting because the cloud had settled upon it and the glory of the Lord had filled the tabernacle. That's where this is going. The God who made the whole universe, who could have created a glorious focal point for his presence anywhere in the cosmos, who at this moment in history is enveloping a whole mountain in cloud and flame, says to his people, I'm going to live with you in a tent. I'm going to let you build it for me. I've already arranged for you to have all the materials. I'm going to give you the instructions. I'll give you the skills. You'll build it and I'll come with you. God provides a way to dwell with his people. Let's take a quick tour then of chapters 25 to 31 and we'll paint a picture of God's grand design, isn't it? There's no Kevin MacLeod, but it's a grand design. I'm going to give you a few verses to look at as we go, perhaps. And I'm going to put up some pictures. This is why I've got my friend Delboy over here. I'm going to put up some pictures from the ESV Study Bible that are really as good as any for getting an idea of all that is to be built. They are kind of artist's impressions rather than anything that we are totally that we know is totally correct, but they're decent impressions to get an idea. So look at verse 25, chapter 25, verse 10. Chapter 25, verse 10. And this is a bit of a surprise. So the first thing about the tabernacle is not the tabernacle. Normally, if you're going to build a house, you're going to do a grand design, you start with the house. You start with the plans and the design, and then you furnish it after that. The house is the main thing, not a particular piece of furniture. But here, the tabernacle starts with the most important piece of furniture, and that is the ark. Can I find my mouse? That is the ark. That's the ark. It's a chest of acacia wood overlaid with gold and fixed up with poles so that it can be carried without being touched. So it's not really furniture, but a very, very fancy box, a chest. The main thing about the whole sanctuary is what's in the box. The testimony, which we saw at the end of chapter 31, is the pair of stone tablets inscribed by the finger of God with the very words and laws of God. It's the basis of their covenant for binding God and Israel together, kept in the holiest and most expensive and most beautiful part of the sanctuary. And over the law, on top of the ark, there is a cover. Verse 17, let's read a little bit from verse 17. So make an atonement cover of pure gold, 2.5 cubits long, and a cubit and a half wide, and make 2 cherubim out of hammered gold at the ends of the cover. Verse 20, the cherubim are to have their wings spread upward, overshadowing the cover with them. The cherubim are to face each other, looking towards the cover. Place the cover on top of the ark, and put in the ark the testimony which I will give you. And there, above the cover, between the 2 cherubim that are over the ark of the testimony, I will meet with you and give you all my commands for the Israelites. So verse 17, make an atonement cover. The footnote gives a slightly different translation or option for what to call this. It says a mercy seat. On top of the box that contains the law that God's people cannot possibly keep, there is a lid called mercy. A mercy seat, a place of mercy, perhaps a throne of mercy, if you like. Just above the lid is where God's presence will be. That's where God will mercifully meet his people. And once a year, on the Day of Atonement, the high priest is going to sprinkle the blood of the sin offering on the mercy seat, this cover, to atone for the sin of God's people. What else is in this design? Well, there's a table, also gold-plated acacia wood with gold plates and dishes, and the bread of the presence, 12 loaves representing the 12 tribes, always there in the presence of God, in the light of the lampstand. Verse 31, also pure gold modeled on a flowering almond tree. Then in chapter 26, there's the tabernacle itself. A large tent with an acacia wood framework and curtains of fine linens and yarn, and on the outside, skins. There were 2 compartments inside, the holy place and the most holy place. The compartments were separated by the most elaborate and beautiful of all the curtains, complete with a pattern of cherubim, angels, warning that behind the curtain in the most holy place above the ark was the invisible presence of a dangerously holy God. In the holy place, there was the table, the lampstand, and as we find in chapter 30, the altar of incense. Then there was another slightly less elaborate curtain over the entrance to the tabernacle. In chapter 27, we step outside the tent into the courtyard, a larger outdoor space containing the bronze-plated altar for burnt offerings. Obviously, that can't go inside the tent. Fire safety and smoke and all the rest. And there's a bronze basin described in chapter 30, not so much for hand hygiene as ritual washing, symbolizing the need to be clean before this God. Chapter 28 is all about what the priests will wear. There's a tunic, which is a long white linen gown. Over that, there's a blue robe. And then there's the ephod, which is like a kind of apron. Very beautiful, with 2 precious gems on the shoulders, engraved with the names of the 12 tribes, so that Aaron the priest will always carry the names of God's people before God. There's the breastplate, which is like a small armor plate over the chest. That's got a different stone for each tribe, close to Aaron's heart. There are bells on the hem of the robe, so that the priest jangles when he goes into the tabernacle, because you don't just slip into the presence of God. It's kind of like a warning of where he is. There's a turban with a gold plate on the forehead, inscribed with the words "Holy to the Lord," so that those words face God, for God to see them as this human being comes into his presence. Chapter 29 is full of gruesome details of the sacrifices and the preparations needed. Firstly, just to cleanse the priests so that they can begin their work, and then details of what the regular sacrifices would be and what they would be for. Just a snippet of the details that will come later about all of that. Chapter 30 has more details of other items and other practices before we come to chapter 31, where we learn who's going to build all this. Men appointed and creatively equipped by God to be able to make everything that he has designed. And then finally, the bit we didn't read of that chapter, there are commands about keeping the Sabbath. And then at the end, as we read, God gives Moses the 2 stone tablets, as it says, inscribed by the finger of God. And overall, we are building towards this bigger picture, a sanctuary where God could dwell with his people. Later there will come some detailed instructions for how the whole thing can be dismantled and transported, and how the tribes should arrange themselves as they walk with it, how it should be set up in the camp, how the tribes should camp around it, with God's sanctuary in the middle, right at the heart of his people. And I hope that's given enough of a sense, really, of what's in these chapters so that we can keep going. They are worth reading slowly. I know we haven't done that today, but it is a glorious, grand design. And in a way, in the last week, I've thought, well, maybe we could have taken a couple of weeks to go through all of this, but here we are. And God designs a home among his people. That's our first big idea today. God designs a home among his people. And this is our second heading, the tabernacle is not God's forever home. The tabernacle is not God's forever home. You know what I mean by a forever home. It's not the one the newlyweds move into. It's maybe not even the one after that, or maybe the one after that. It's the last one. It's the last home. It's the one they live in while the kids grow up. Probably stay as long as they can in it, extending, remodeling rather than moving, redecorating like it's the 4th rail bridge. You know, once they finish, they go to the oldest bit and they just start again. Now, normally I'm a little bit cautious about aspiring to a forever home. I think as a concept, it's a little bit more, capitalist American dream than it is gospel focus. I'm not sure it's a real priority for us as Christians, but today let's think of it as a good thing anyway. If God could live with his people forever, a forever home, then that would be a good thing, wouldn't it? But this design, this version, is not the one. It's not God's forever home. Well, why not? Let's go a little bit deeper. What's the architect's vision here? The Maritime Museum in Osaka, in Japan, is a huge glass dome. Actually, tsunami-proof as well, at least partly. And the main exhibition inside is a ship inside this glass dome, because the architect's vision was a ship in a bottle. Well, what's the vision here? The vision is Eden. God placed the first man and woman in the garden paradise home of Eden. It was safe and secure, a place of provision and plenty, centered around a tree of life, and was even a home where God could walk with them. God lived with them. He was at home with them in a way in this garden. But when Adam and Eve rejected God, he put them out of that home, and he set a guard of cherubim and a flaming sword on the east side to bar the way back. That's in Genesis chapter 3. Now, since then, God and man have not been at home with one another. That's what we're searching for, a way to fix that and make that happen again. And this tabernacle is a way to live together again. There are lots of echoes of Eden. So the materials for the tabernacle begin with gold and end with onyx, and they're both mentioned in Eden in Genesis chapter 2. The lampstand with its buds and blossoms looks like a tree that gives light, echoing the tree of life in Eden. 7 times in these chapters we read, the Lord said to Moses, and 7 times in Genesis 1 we read, God said, as he created. The key craftsmen here are said to be equipped by God's Spirit, who in Genesis 1 is also said to be poised for the work of creation. The tabernacle courtyard was to have a single entrance on the east side, just like Eden, when Adam and Eve were put out of it. The curtain that closed off the most holy place was to be designed with cherubim on it, guarding the access to God's presence, just like Eden. And the climax of both the creation account and the tabernacle chapters is the Sabbath, resting at home with God. Lots of echoes of Eden, and some of those echoes are positive and some are not. God's presence is still reserved, still guarded. This is a huge step forward, but it's a long way from here to the idea of walking with the Lord in the cool of the day, Genesis 3. It's hardly a forever home. It's not up there with Eden. Instead, this new home is full of home truths. For one thing, not everyone is welcome into all parts of this home. Almost the opposite is true. There are zones to it, like Sinai. Mount Sinai is where God is meeting his people right now, in our chapters. And the tabernacle is like Sinai on the move. Sinai to take with them. Sinai to go. The courtyard around the tabernacle is like the lowest slopes where the people could approach. The room inside, called the holy place, was like the part of Sinai where the elders of Israel could come and meet God, a place for selected representatives. And the most holy place was like the very top of Sinai, a place where only one representative could go. We might think of it like a nuclear power plant in the middle of God's people. It has to be built correctly. It has to be approached correctly with great caution. Access is restricted to a select few who have specific clothing to wear and tasks to perform. It brings awesome power and blessing, but it's tremendously dangerous. Approach in the wrong way and die. This is a home, but it's not exactly homely. It's not a forever home. What else tells us that? Well, aside from the zones and restrictions, there are the guards. Cherubim embroidered on the curtain to the most holy place, guarding and barring the way like the angel of Genesis 3. The way to God is still almost entirely closed off. What else? Well, the people are not to touch things. I remember visiting a church with our family when the kids were much younger, toddler age, and we stayed with a couple for lunch. Not a couple ever likely to find this video, I don't think. And their children had flown the nest, and they were in that tidy, sort of ultra grown up stage. Everything was lovely and everything was delicate and nothing was toddler proof. They were very welcoming, very relaxed, absolutely. And they didn't tell us to stop the kids from touching things, but there was nothing the kids could safely touch. There was so much that caught their little eyes and invited their little hands, and all of it was breakable. It was all just waiting to fall over and smash. It was quite a stressful afternoon altogether. In God's home, though, the people are not to touch things either, which is tricky given that it will be constantly dismantled and moved and reassembled. But all the furniture has rings attached with poles inserted through for carrying. The people are not to touch the furniture of God's home. They're to move it all by lifting the poles. And of course, if we're looking for clues that this is not a forever home, not a forever way for God to live with his people, then I think we have to include the blood. There's a moment in Jurassic Park, the movie Jurassic Park, where the T-Rex catches and eats some other unpronounceable dinosaur, and the little boy, it was Timmy, he watches on from behind a tree trunk and he just gasps, "Look how much blood." Well, in chapter 29, a bull and 2 rams are to be slaughtered in God's presence, and the blood daubed on the corner horns of the altar and poured out at its base and sprinkled on the altar and daubed on the right ears of the priests and on their right thumbs and their right big toes, and even sprinkled on those priestly garments that were so beautiful and were designed, chapter 28 verse 2, for dignity and honor. There it is, for dignity and honor, but they're going to be blood spattered. Not to mention that this altar outside is going to be put to a shocking amount of use. The courtyard of this mobile temple looks less like a sacred worship space and more like an abattoir. The consecration of the priests alone involves a bull sacrifice every day for a week. That's before they can start. And then the normal running of the tabernacle for the foreseeable future, well, it goes a bit like this. Let me look it up. It's chapter 29, verse 38. This is what you are to offer on the altar regularly each day. 2 lambs a year old. Offer one in the morning and the other at twilight. Verse 42, for the generations to come, this burnt offering is to be made regularly at the entrance to the tent of meeting before the Lord. There I will meet with you and speak to you. There also I will meet with the Israelites, and the place will be consecrated by my glory, says the Lord. There's a lot of blood and a lot of death in this home. Sin is deadly. The wages of sin is death. Death is what we are paid. It's the wages we are owed for sin. And coming close to God meant death. That was going to be a picture every day. Coming close to God means death. But this tabernacle was a place where a substitute could die instead, so that God's people could come close to him. It's good news in that way. But for all the echoes of the Genesis paradise, this is not exactly Eden, is it? The tabernacle is not God's forever home. And one last hint of that comes in a little repeated phrase. So 25 verse 9 says, "Make this tabernacle and all its furnishings exactly like the pattern I will show you." 25 verse 40 says, "See that you make them according to the pattern shown you on the mountain." 26 verse 30 says, "Set up the tabernacle according to the plan shown you on the mountain." And 27 verse 8 says, "It is to be made just as you were shown on the mountain." Hebrews quotes this phrase and tells us that the tabernacle is a copy and a shadow of what is in heaven. I don't think that means that there's a better tent, or even a physical building in heaven that is some sort of architectural masterpiece that Moses needs to imitate. I don't think that's the point necessarily. I think it means that the tabernacle points to genuine, eternal fellowship between God and human beings. That's what the Garden of Eden was until we broke it. That's what the Old Testament is searching for, a way and a forever home for God and his people to share. And that leads us to the last and shortest of today's headings, which is that God makes a home with us in Jesus. God makes a home with us in Jesus. The tabernacle is not God's forever home, but God makes a home with us in Jesus. Hebrews 8-10 is the go-to part of the New Testament to help us understand the tabernacle. Great place, a great thing for you to read later on if you'd like to do that. So let's dip into Hebrews 9 just a little bit. Hebrews chapter 9, reading from verse 11. "So when Christ came as high priest of the good things that are already here, he went through the greater and more perfect tabernacle that is not man-made, that is to say, not a part of this creation. He did not enter by means of the blood of goats and calves, but he entered the most holy place once for all by his own blood, having obtained eternal redemption. The blood of goats and bulls and the ashes of a heifer sprinkled on those who are ceremonially unclean sanctify them so that they are outwardly clean. How much more then will the blood of Christ, who through the eternal Spirit offered himself unblemished to God, cleanse our consciences from acts that lead to death, so that we may serve the living God." God provides a way to dwell with his people. And for us, it's not a tent or a temple. It's not even a church or chapel. It's Jesus Christ. The tabernacle is full of flashbacks to the first creation where God dwelled with human beings. And it's full of anticipation of the new creation where God will dwell with his new humanity. And that means the tabernacle is a massive signpost to Jesus. Jesus entered the presence of God by his own blood. He actually had no sin to keep him out. He was welcome with God. He had every right to walk into the presence of God and be at home with him. But he spilled his own blood all the same to atone for our sin so that he could take us with him, so that we can come to God with Jesus. Look around that tabernacle scene. I don't know how well you can see it really, and depends what screen size and resolution and all the rest. But look around the tabernacle scene once more, even in your mind, and see Jesus. So the law in the ark, Jesus fulfilled it completely. The atonement cover over the top, Jesus atoned for our sin with his own blood. The presence of God above the ark, well, Jesus is Emmanuel. He is God with us. His Spirit lives in us if we are his, and it lives in his people, the church. John 1 says of Jesus, the Word became flesh and made his dwelling among us. It literally says Jesus tabernacled among us. Jesus pitched up with us. The table with the bread of God's presence that's always in the holy place. Jesus who said, I am the bread of life. Jesus whose body we symbolically eat as we share bread at communion. Jesus who now speaks for us in God's presence. The lampstand, giving light to the whole space. Well, Jesus said, I'm the light of the world. The courtyard, the place of access to God's people. Jesus said, I am the way, the truth, and the life. No one comes to the Father except through me. The basin for washing, Jesus who washed his disciples' feet on the night before his death to make them clean in a sort of symbolic way before the next day he went and died to make them clean deep down. The curtain barring the way to the most holy place, which later tore from top to bottom, from God's end to our end, in the temple as Jesus hung on the cross, opening up the way to God in the most holy place. Jesus, the true priest. Jesus, the true sacrifice. Jesus, Jesus, Jesus. In Jesus, the one true, holy Creator God is with us, at home with us. In Jesus, our sin has been dealt with. The wages of death have been paid out. Jesus did not sin. He didn't owe God his life, but he died as our substitute to receive what was owed for our sin. Not over and over, not day by day or week by week on every new altar. We don't need altars, but once and for all at the cross. And in Jesus, something even better is coming. The tabernacle, says Hebrews, is a copy and a shadow of something better, a meeting place between God and his people that will endure, where human beings will offer pure worship, purified themselves in the presence of God forever. Well, Jesus said, in my Father's house are many rooms. I am going there to prepare a place for you, and I'll come back and take you to be with me, that you also may be where I am. We're going to be at home with God in Jesus. Sometimes it does feel as if God is far off. He feels remote, he feels hard to know, and he is those things in a way. He's not tame, he's not domesticated, he's not simple or small, and he's not altogether like us. And for sure, when we read the Old Testament, it's hard for any of that to change. But don't look at the shadows without looking at the light. Let the old point to the new. Look again and again and again at Jesus. Jesus is God making his home with us. Jesus is what God is like. If you belong to him, trusting and following him, then Jesus is with you. He's near you. He's walking alongside you. He's never going to leave you. He's bringing you along this bumpy, difficult, often painful road home. And if you're not a Christian, you're not trusting and following Jesus, or not really sure about all of this, well, notice this. All of these promises and blessings are ours only in Jesus. The tabernacle tells you that this God is not easily accessible. He is dangerous. He's dangerously holy. In our sin and rebellion against him, we don't belong with him. It's not safe. But he can be approached on his terms. He has made a way. And thankfully, it's not with priests and sacrifices and tents and temples, but through Jesus. So look to him. Investigate him. It's all about him. Let's finish with a few extra verses from Hebrews, and this is just the end. I'm just going to read these and pray. So just a few verses from Hebrews 10, from verse 19. Therefore, brothers, since we have confidence to enter the most holy place by the blood of Jesus, by a new and living way opened for us through the curtain, that is his body,